So let's talk about the dismissive avoidant attachment style and the term known as counter-dependency. So if you're not familiar with what counter-dependency is and how it affects a dismissive avoidant and all of their relationships and some signs to really be aware of, we are going to cover all of that in this video. So, counterdependency is essentially a concept in psychology that describes a pattern of behavior where people tend to resist emotional attachment, dependence, or reliance of any form. And it can actually be to quite an extreme degree. It's basically the opposite of what we hear in terms of codependency, where individuals deeply rely on each other or expect each other to meet all of one another's needs and really foster a tremendous amount of dependency, essentially to really build out like their identity and their self-esteem. And also, it's usually a subconscious comfort zone for people to enter into these sort of codependent relationship dynamics. So we can think of counter dependency as essentially being the opposite. And some symptoms you'll generally see if somebody is counter dependent is number one, extreme self reliance and hyper independence. And what I mean by this is if you think of a dismissive avoidant attachment style and how they are parented, what we'll generally see is that, the parenting creates this dynamic of them not being able to emotionally rely on somebody else. And so they believe relationships, because they've learned to attach this way to others through literally the attachments that were built in their childhood. They believe relationships and reliance is more about like individuals being fully independent of each other and then sort of overlapping here and there around smaller things, but having this sort of extreme self reliance. And usually, if we were to look a little more deeply, it's not actually self reliance out of truth. It's not like, oh, yeah, I truly love to just be on my own all the time and be extremely independent and never want to or have to rely on anybody for anything. It's usually instead rooted in fear. And so it's usually a fear of being vulnerable to somebody and then getting hurt, because a lot of dismissive avoidance as children, they were vulnerable because children are vulnerable. And when they're trying to rely emotionally on their caregivers, there's this unfortunate dynamic of kind of consistent rejection. And so it creates this fear of ever being exposed to that kind of pain again. So we'll often see the counter dependent, and I would definitely say the vast majority of dismissive avoidants are very counter dependent, of course, until they start doing work and healing some of these things from those wounds of childhood. But as they do, they can overcome some of this extreme self-reliance, but if they don't, then they usually will stay in this dynamic of trying to be just so extremely self-reliant as a means of self-protection. The next big thing you'll see is encounter dependency and a sense of avoidance of emotional intimacy specifically. So it's not even just relying on one another to do favors or help each other out or have each other's backs, but there's actually this like big avoidance of any emotional vulnerability, connection, and really bonding with other people. Now, again, as a dismissive avoidant, this would exist along a continuum, right? This isn't necessarily that like dismissive avoidants cannot have emotionally intimate relationships, because they can, but it may be less intimate than securely attached individuals, for example. And you would generally see as well that there can be a little bit of this cold feet dynamic, right? We'll often see dismissive avoidants start dating somebody, open up, and then as soon as there's this vulnerability and this emotional bond really being built, a lot of the times, not always, but a lot of the times, dismissive avoidants will really feel afraid of their own feelings, afraid of their own sense of vulnerability when they really have strong feelings. And it can cause them to really get cold feet and shut down to sort of like protect themselves before, like reject somebody else before they get rejected, kind of thing. Another big thing we'll see in counter dependency, which is really interesting, is this fear of being controlled. But this fear of being controlled will be really exaggerated. So we'll see, for example, that the fear of being controlled, like I can think of an example of somebody who shared in a webinar the other day. And they said, I asked my dismissal avoidant partner to make a compromise. And as soon as I asked for them to make a compromise with me about doing things on different evenings, they said, oh, you're trying to control me. But how is this person kind of lumping in together compromise and control, because my intention is not to control anybody. And sometimes we'll see somebody be very sensitive to, this idea that they could be controlled. It's almost like this overly magnified fear of being controlled. I do tend to see more enmeshed dismissive avoidance struggle with this than our typical dismissive avoidance, but it can absolutely be there too. And it's because at a deep root, all dismissive avoidance generally felt a sense of relief in childhood when they could carve out space for themselves, right? So imagine you take a child and a child is like constantly yearning for attunement and emotional connection from their parent, and they can't get it really. And so eventually the dismissive avoidant child says, okay, I just need to pull away. I just need to like go in a different direction and shut down and stop yearning for this because it's the only thing that's going to bring me relief. And so they kind of adapt, right? And as an adaptation, they go into this really profound sense of, okay, I am going to really rely on myself. I'm going to be really independent. I'm going to be really autonomous. I'm just going to value my freedom. And when they actually do make that adaptation and they stop yearning and they really sort of absorb their external focus back into the relationship to self, they actually get relief and they feel more free. And so they make all these positive emotional associations at a subconscious level to freedom, to autonomy, to independence. And so when somebody is asking for compromise in relationships or even interdependency, which is the opposite of like the codependency extreme and the counter-dependency extreme, it's like the actual we keep the relationship to self and have a relationship to others. It's that healthy middle ground balance. The idea of moving out of counter-dependency into interdependency relative to where a dismissive avoidant is, that feels scary. That feels like you're asking them to move into codependency. That feels like you're asking them to move into a place of giving up freedom, giving up self-reliance, giving up, this autonomy. And even though that's not the intentions of other people in many cases, that's how that's going to be received because of that adaptation the person has made, which makes sense, right? So a lot of times dismissive avoidance, in order to want to become secure and move in that direction, have to understand these concepts, right? Of being able to make compromises and be a little more vulnerable and reprogram at a subconscious level a lot of those old fears that they're carrying because of painful childhood experiences. Another big theme you'll see in terms of counterdependency is an avoidance of commitment. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. And it's again because it triggers a lot of these subconscious fears of being trapped in a dynamic where your needs can't be met because that's what mirrors back to their childhood. And then another big thing you'll see is a fear of asking for help. It can be really scary for somebody who's counter-dependent to ask for help because again, you'll see in so many cases, by the way, for dismissive avoidance, that when they are in a dynamic where they try to ask for help as children, like let's say they come home from school and they're sad, a lot of times we'll see a dismissive avoidant be told, like, hey, children should be seen and not heard, or don't be a crybaby, like, get through it. Nobody wants to see tears. Sometimes their emotions are actually shamed. And if that's your experience when you need help enough times as a child, of course you're programmed. You're literally being conditioned to not ask for help as an adult because it feels like it's just going to constantly bring you negative consequences or outcomes. And then last but not least, we can see a sense of defensiveness, and emotional detachment, right? We'll see this kind of aloofness that can happen because there's this need to sort of keep people at arm's length. And if people try to get too close, it's sort of like a porcupine, right? You can see like the prickliness on the outside to try to self-protect. And I think something that's so important to recognize is that underneath this, we'll generally see that, underneath this, there's a sensitive person a lot of the times who's going through stuff, who's going through different emotional experiences, who does feel, even if they're repressing a lot of their feelings as a coping mechanism, but that can create this sense of pain, of suffering. And it can be scary for this person to really want to open up and allow other people in.
So I just wanted to stop by here and let you know a really exciting announcement, and is that we are doing $1,000 off of our lifetime memberships to the Personal Development School for Life. So I will tell you what's actually included in there. Number one, you get access to all of our different 60 plus courses. Everything about every single attachment style, how to reprogram, how to heal. We have courses in there about the 6 stages of relationships and how to navigate each stage. We have courses in there about how to get back together or heal relationships between different attachment styles and all of the steps for reconnecting. And we have all sorts of other courses on boundaries, conflict communication, setting and achieving goals at the subconscious level, seeing how attachment styles even show up in your workplace and how to navigate some of those different dynamics and heal those aspects of your attachment style. There's so many courses in there, but number 2 feature that we have, daily social support groups. So these are small groups that are all included in the lifetime membership, and we do daily events, sometimes even twice a day, where there will be, 10 people or so led by a trained counselor, coach, or facilitator. And you can actually join in there and practice some of the different tools with other members. It's a great place to build relationships, connect with like-minded people, and to really fast track your learning and have that extra support all the time. And number 3, we have daily webinars Monday through Saturday. I do 3 of those webinars every single week. That's a time to come in, ask me your questions. You can come in on camera and we can chat. You can come in off camera and just post them in the chat, whatever you're most comfortable doing. And we have other amazing counselors, coaches, facilitators who also lead other webinars. And again, those are slightly larger groups of people, but it's a great opportunity to connect with like-minded learners who also care about the same things: emotional connection, relationships, and personal growth. So I hope you check it out. We also have all these different discussion forums in there. We have a Facebook group, so you can connect with each other there as well. And there's a tremendous amount of community support in an ongoing way at PDS. So I would love to see you on the other side. I hope you join me. And now we'll go back to the video. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know if counter-dependency is something you struggle with. Let me know if you want more content about this. Give a thumbs up if you want to see more content about counter-dependency as a whole. And if you have any questions at all, please feel free to put them in the discussion down below, as well as any video suggestions you have for the future. I'd love to see them. Thank you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe if you are interested in this channel. I would really appreciate it. And I will see you in future videos.